Howdy, this is Jim Rutt, and this is The Jim Rutt Show. Listeners have asked us to provide pointers to some of the resources we talk about on the show. We now have links to books and articles referenced in recent podcasts that are available on our website. We also offer full transcripts. Go to jimruttshow.com. That's jimruttshow.com. Today's guest is Ryan Blosser. Ryan is a farmer, an educator, a writer, a mental health professional, and co-founder of Shenandoah Permaculture Institute. And he's the owner-operator of Dancing Star Farm. The intersection of his passion for growing food and helping people fuels his unique perspective on building community resilience through permaculture design. Good stuff. And we're going to be talking about his new book, which he wrote with his co-author, Trevor Piersol, called Mulberries in the Rain, Growing Permaculture Plants for Food and Friendship. I got to tell you a little bit about Trevor here. We don't want Ryan to get all the credit. Trevor Piersol is a farmer, permaculture designer, and educator, co-founder of the Shenandoah Permaculture Institute, and he has his own farm, Wild Rose Orchard. Trevor is dedicated to the advancement of regenerative agriculture with particular focus on perennial fruits, medicinal herbs, and easy care native plants. Welcome, Ryan.
Thank you, Jim. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, and in full disclosure, Ryan and I have been friends for years, and Trevor also. My wife actually took the photographs for the book, so this is kind of a family kind of event today. So if I don't beat the shit out of them like I do some of my guests, you'll know why.
I told Trevor I was nervous to be on the podcast with a brain as big as yours. Although I wanted to say I'm working on a new book, Jim, that has a story about killing a deer at the Rutt Farm.
Oh, that would be cool. You've killed a few here. I tell the story about this sort of half hippie dude comes over there to kill two does on doe day and ends up with a 6-point and 8-point buck. And I go, shit!
I still don't know if to feel happy or bad about that.
I think it is what it is, right? That's what the hunting gods wanted that day.
Yeah, that's true.
That was a great story. And I also have a picture, too, of these two deer on slabs of cardboard in a Prius, right? Which I showed to my redneck buddies and go, what the fuck, right?
That's a great thing. What a great day.
That was a whole lot of fun. Right? I remember tramping around looking for the one of them, and we finally did find it and all that. Anyway, let's get into this book, and then let's talk more generally about the topic of permaculture. So let's start with kind of a cliche question, but what motivated you and Trevor to write this book?
I think the most simple explanation for it is in our courses. So Trevor and I, along with Emily Twerdy, founded Shenandoah Permaculture, and we teach permaculture design courses. I think we've done 20 in the last 10 years. And in our courses, a lot of students come hungry for building their plant knowledge and also are overwhelmed by it. And for the first few years, we would describe, the plant nerd thing of falling asleep, memorizing a nursery catalog or seed catalog. And that did not feel robust enough. It felt kind of surface. It just rote memory like you would do in high school. And as our students continue to be hungry for this and want more and not satisfied by that explanation or that go do this direction, we landed on the idea of story and building your plant knowledge one by one. And through that, we started to see connections around relationship to each other, relationship to plants, and the idea that plants are characters in our own lives. We started teaching a lot of our plant sessions and courses through stories and encouraging folks to start with one plant at a time, learn how to use that plant, learn how to grow that plant, and eventually those plants become stories and characters in your own lives. And at that point, you know that plant well.
And I make the point for the audience, I'm not much of a gardener myself, though my wife is pretty big time, right? And so I've gotten a fair bit of garden knowledge secondhand, though I am a tree person. I can probably name 90% of the trees on my property, and there's a lot of them, right? And so I've always been a tree person, but not so much a gardening person. And so when I committed to read the book, I go, I wonder how much fun this will be. But it turns out it was a shitload of fun. So even if you're not a garden person per se, the way that Ryan and Trevor have woven their quite amazing and outrageous personal stories around each chapter. The book's worth reading it just for that. And then it's a bunch of very practical, it suddenly goes from these outrageous tales to very practical, very clearly written advice. Hell, makes me want to start a permaculture farm out, permaculture forest orchard, or whatever the hell it is you call it, out here. It was great. So even if you're not a super gardener, consider reading the book for the stories. They are really quite excellent.
Yeah, I appreciate hearing that. Trevor and I, we're nerds in permaculture, so we bought all the permaculture books. We also make fun of the permaculture books because it also feels like everybody wants to write a permaculture book, and in class we'll often roll our eyes at not another permaculture book. And when we started threatening each other to write one, we just really decided it had to be unique, and it had to be our individual voices, and it had to be entertaining. It couldn't just be another permaculture book.
And as you know, not just permaculture books, but many gardening books are just earnest as hell. They hurt your teeth just to read the prose, right?
You know what? The minute you said it hurt your teeth, I knew exactly what you were talking about.
This ain't one of those, which is great. So let's start out where you start out, which is the human sector. Initially, one would say, wait a minute, we're talking about gardening here. What the hell is the human sector? So why don't you, sort of lay out how you came to appreciate how crucial the human sector is, and what is it that you mean by that term?
Yeah, that's a big question. In fact, that's the topic of a second book I'm working on with Dr. Laura Mentor, an anthropologist out of University of Mary Washington, and this idea and integrated into permaculture came out of conversations that myself, Trevor, and Emily were having during the courses. The human sector, so sectors in permaculture are really simply energies that impact a design site. And one of Trevor's permaculture teachers, Dave Jackie, has a great quote. And that great quote is 98% of the permaculture projects that fail due to poor design in the human sector. And so we knew this, but we haven't experienced up until a few years ago a robust integration of what that human sector concept and how to design it might look like. And so using my background in counseling and experience working as a child and family therapist, we started to try and bring it into our courses and designing the community experience of the learning community itself, and then starting to look for ways to expand that beyond just the learning community. We're not there yet. We're still very much working on it. But what we decided was that human sector was every bit as hard to influence and change as something like climate. And so we put it high up in a priority and something that we should be focusing on if we're designing and trying to live sustainable lives and sustainable communities.
Could you give an example, kind of like a nice little homey example of when you're actually trying to do permaculture farming, where the salience of the human sector comes in?
When you asked that question, what I landed on was the idea of always connect. And so what we're looking for in permaculture systems with plants and trees and maybe we got farm animals, we want to create opportunities for those to connect and occupy different niches. And so you may have a guild planting where a tree is being fed by comfrey, for example, that you plant near that, and you create a connection between those two plants rather than just diversity for diversity's sake. What that might look like in the human sector might be, for example, I may have on my property at Churchville, this is a good example for that. I've got on my 4-acre property all that I need for my family to survive. I've got food for days, not exactly a crazy corner of bean cans, but we've got all the tomatoes we need. We do all the canning we've got to do, freezers full of meat, and very little need for other things. What I don't have is an ability to plow my 100-yard driveway. And I've got a neighbor that has an ability to do that. In that human sector scenario, if I'm not in right relationship with my neighbor, if we don't get along, if I'm not making connections, for example, bringing over a braid of garlic braid every year for his family to have garlic all year, or showing up with 10 quarts of canned tomatoes, then he may not show up to my site when we get 12 inches of rain or 12 inches of snow dumped on that driveway and plow our driveway. That's just a really quick example for that important piece of human sector. We have to design in opportunities for relationship, for connection, or the idea of self-sufficiency becomes quite fragile.
Yeah, and I warn people all the time who claim that they're preppers or something. I go, dude, you can have all the shit you want in your warehouse, but your neighbors are going to come and kill you and take it. What you really need is relationships in the community, be considered to be an honored and full player in your community who everybody else treasures and wants to be in relationship with. That will get you through hard times far better than a back room full of canned beans and .22 ammo.
Exactly. We are our relationships. I don't provide for my family. My relationships do. And that idea of that network, or I think in anthropology, there's this idea of the mesh work. Yeah, we are relationships.
All right. Well, I know you use this as a pivot point because you talk about, you started out with Dave Jake's scale of permanence, and you've updated a little bit to include some of the human aspects. I think it would be very helpful for our listeners, almost none of whom probably know what permaculture even is. Why don't you give us your brief definition of permaculture? There was actually a good short definition in the book, but I unfortunately forgot to copy it out.
Absolutely. It's quite simple. It's using nature as a model to create and to design sustainable human habitats.
I think that was pretty close to the one I had in mind from the book. Yeah, that resonated about right. So now let's go to the human-centered scale of permanence list that you guys have created, that where you updated previous lists to include some of the human and social elements.
Yes. So they're ordered. I think what's important is a guy named Yauman developed the first scale of permanence that Dave Jackie then added to. And then Trevor, myself, and Emily have added to it further. And so they're ordered from the least amount of resource that it takes to change in a landscape or on a site up to the most amount of resource it takes to change.
The list seems to be ordered in the opposite of the least to most. It seems like it's the most to least, because on the list that came out of the book was climate first.
Mm-hmm.
That's the hardest to change. You got a damn thing you can do about the climate.
It's the hardest. One way to think about it is it requires a lot of resources. And so one way to change the climate is a greenhouse and propane or other kind of hardscape designs. But it takes a lot of effort to do that. Yes.
Okay. And talk about, how does climate impact ideas about permaculture design?
It's a limiting factor, just like water. And so you're not going to be able to grow lemons in where I live in the Shenandoah Valley unless you pour a bunch of resources into growing those lemons, like creating a heated greenhouse for them.
Yep. And I know my wife, I mentioned, is a very avid gardener. And for 10 years, we lived in Santa Fe. And she found that very annoying to be living in the desert, right? Where the kind of plants she wanted to grow just weren't going to grow unless you wanted to have a $300 a month water bill. And water is really expensive out there.
Exactly. And in looking at this order of intervention, of hardest to least, it also gives you an idea of what to start looking for. So I'm in a very arid New Mexico climate. I can't grow maybe an apple tree as well, but I can look for a plant that's going to do really well in this environment. And so start to work with nature rather than try to spend the resources to change it.
Yeah, and I think that's probably the clearest takeaway. Hey, you're in zone 4, you don't grow marginal shit that sometimes will make it in zone 4 and sometimes won't. Understand what you got and work with it, not against it to the degree possible.
Yeah, or if you do know it's a gamble and just do a little percentage of that and do the rest of the thing you know is going to work. Yep.
Yeah, you see that mistake all the time. People don't quite understand where they are and they're trying to force their love into a climate that isn't right for their love.
And instead, just find something else to love, because there's a lot of great plants out there.
Exactly. Now, the next one on your list is the human and social level. Again, that ain't easy to to change. In fact, I sometimes say 50% of human unhappiness is the mistaken belief by a woman that she can change a man, and the other 50% is the opposite.
Yes, that's at the deep into a long marriage, I can vibe with that.
Yeah, we'll be, believe it or not, 44 years in June.
Whoa, you guys are my heroes. That's admirable. Joy and I are, I believe, almost at 25 years.
Well, that's also amazing in this day and age.
Yeah, we met as babies. I think I was 20 years old when I first met her. She bought me beer illegally when I first met her.
Class. You got to love a girl like that.
Yeah. I was like, you're 21, you go get it. But yeah, the human sector, it includes relationships. It includes the interpersonal. It includes the intrapersonal, so how we relate to ourselves, which is very much that psychological or psychosocial realm. It includes the transpersonal, some of that woo-woo shit I know you love, Jim.
Yeah.
I know. And it includes other more concrete things like zoning laws.
I was going to ask that question. I thought it must, right? I remember in the book it did. And in this part of the country, those things are trifling as fuck sometimes.
They are, and they require tons of preparation, tons of knowledge, lots of persuasion, and meeting with, your county leaders.
And so when you're starting to think of a holistic plan about your property, you better consider those kinds of things. And also, you don't want to piss off your neighbors unnecessarily, right?
Exactly.
If you're living in suburbia, you probably don't want to have a pig farm, even if it was legal, right?
Exactly, because they're going to show up at the zoning meeting and they're going to have thoughts.
Exactly. Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And then next, and again, this is in some sense the canvas on which you work, you guys talk about the landform.
Yes. And I like the idea of canvas on which you work, because when you're thinking about landform, there's a lot of decisions to make. What is the shape of the land? What's the slope of the land? How much intervention you want to put into that? So where to put ponds, whether to dig swales to manage water, lots of different decisions to be made with that.
And I noticed a fair bit of thinking in the book about contours, how to work with the land and how to, because, one of the nice things about contour farming is the water doesn't run off as rapidly. It runs through each cascade, each row. And so the water tends to be more preserved on the land but if you're flat, that's not going to work, right?
Yeah. And Ben Falk, another permaculture thinker, likes to talk about the ideas of when you have a lot of water and you got a lot of landform, how do you use that landform to slow and sink and store that water?
And that is indeed your next topic, is water. And in much of the world, water is a limiting factor, right? And even here in Virginia, we have more droughts than we'd like here in the mountains, and more where I am up in the mountains, a little bit less so down where you are. But you got to think through not only the average water, but the variance. Talk about that a little bit.
Oh man, this is where I could get a little teary-eyed. I don't know how much my story at Danestar Farm in 2018. Do you remember 2018 where you are?
It rained all summer.
Bingo.
We had 100 inches of rain.
Okay.
Which is, the typical rainfall here is about 35, a little bit less than in the valley because we're in the rain shadow of the Alleghenies. And both Celia's and our neighbor's next farmer, real serious farmer, we both thought we were hallucinating, but both of their rain records showed 100 inches.
It was amazing. And so whenever I talk about limiting factors, often folks go right to drought. And so we added a fourth of what to do: slow, sink, or spread that water. We also want to figure out how to send it. So at Danestar Farm in 2018, I averaged about 37 inches of rain a year. I had 83 on that site. My neighbor, not to any fault of his own, he has a conventional farming practice, and he sprung a spring because the groundwater got so high that it started flooding my fields. I lost my organic certification because his chemicals flooded my field. And then it was underwater for 18 months. And so that's a year that I shudder when I think about, because it completely crushed the business at Dancing Star Farm and our ability to operate. So water is a very limiting factor, whether it's not enough or too much, and it needs to be designed for.
Yeah, in fact, every farmer tells you it's either too little, too much, or in the wrong place, right? And what guidance would you give people to think about? Because one of the things that I talk about in my other work in complexity science and stuff is you got to pay attention to the variance, even as much or more than the average. How much do things change? So maybe give the audience a little idea or two how you might think about dealing with the variance of rain, let's say over there in Augusta County, so that you can survive an 87-inch year and you can also survive a 25-inch year.
Unfortunately, the 25-inch year or the 5-inch year right now feels a little easier than the 86-inch year in terms of planning for it. And so it's not a simple answer, but the answer for that is redundancy in your water systems. So I've got a well, I've got a 30,000 gallon pond, and I'm developing a cistern, a ferrocement cistern that captures my roof water. It's 10,000 gallons. And so if something goes in my system, I love that phrase, 2 is 1 and 1 is none. If something goes, I always have a backup that'll keep resilience in the system. In terms of that moment at 86 inches, I think I didn't do it. I had a class of students did a research and looked at my site, and they had found information, I think 150 years ago, something similar had happened on my site and had flooded it, and it was underwater for over a year and a half. I'm not sure where or how they got the information, but the lesson I took away from is A, I cannot count on keeping my annuals there every year, but B, I need to skew more towards perennials in that system. And so when I say perennials, I mean tree crops. Specifically nut crops. So right now I'm planting that field out rather than tomatoes and peppers. I'm running Chinese chestnuts and other tree crops down there.
Cool. Yeah, and it's something you always got to think about. It is interesting to make the point that too much water is even more devastating than too little.
Man, I feel almost bashful saying this, but I learned that year that it's easier to put water in than it is to take it out.
Yeah, that summer was nuts. I mean, we'd go right around our property, and woods that's just normally woods would be 4 inches of water, like going through the Everglades. It was crazy. The only crop that did well that year was mushrooms in like September when it dried out a bit. It was like, I've never seen so many mushrooms in my life.
Yeah, man, I not to get all squishy on you, but I have a distinct memory because Danstar Farm, my farm vegetable operation last year, we were crushing it. We were having huge farmers markets, and it was the year we were going to do really well. And then whenever that rain started, I don't know if it was end of June, early July, I saw the wall of water come from set like 50 acres away to my field. And I remember just sitting on my driveway, head in my hands, just like crying, like, here it goes.
Fuck.
I'm not going to survive this.
Fuck. Terrible.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, let's move on to our next topic, which is access and circulation.
Yeah, this is something that needs to be considered when designing your farm. Not just foot traffic, but also vehicle traffic. So how are you going to get your materials in and out? How are you going to get your vegetables from pack out to house or from pack out to market? Another way to think about it would be diagramming the movement in a day. So on a homestead or on a farm, if it takes you 5 minutes to walk to and from a field, and you do that, let's say 10 times, you almost lost an hour of the day walking. And you don't always have to design for efficiency. I've got a good friend, he's in his 70s right now, and he actually designed access and circulation on his property. So he has to walk past 3 acres of woods just to go to the back of his property to wash his clothes. And I was like, why did you do that? And he said, because I want to make sure I constantly exercise. And so he designed that access and inefficiency on purpose to create the necessity for him to stay moving on into his later ages.
So it sounds like the takeaway is mindfulness about what it is you're trying to achieve. But, you and I both know farmers. You are a farmer. For the average farmer, there ain't enough minutes in the day, not even close. You just go from thing to thing to thing to thing. So picking up 10% efficiency would be huge.
It's a huge thing. And, one of my favorite, this is a quote from Emily, our co-owner at Shenandoah Permaculture. Her quote to interns was always, "You should be running."
Hurry the fuck up. Hurry the fuck up.
Yes.
Well, my brother was a construction company owner, and one year, and he's famous for getting on the job, jumping out of his truck and yelling, "Hurry the fuck up." And so one year for Christmas, I had some very elegant business cards made up with his company logo and name on it. And then in italic script underneath, it said, "Hurry the fuck up."
Oh, man. That would be a great business, the t-shirt design for a business.
But it's the truth. I mean, there's not enough hours in the day, and the sun, is only going to shine so many hours. And anytime you're dawdling, you're losing, right? Losing ground. Second law of thermodynamics, as us nerds would say, right? Shit's always falling apart.
Exactly. And you can, it's so many, once you start thinking in this way and you can to start designing your property with these principles and these methods, some really interesting things can come out of that work.
I read in the book that there were some very interesting things, particularly about your gilding, so that they would come together at a similar time, so you could harvest one little pod at a time. But we'll get the gilds later. Let's talk quickly about vegetation and wildlife.
Again, that's it's below access in terms of resources to change. And for me, that this bottom part of the scale of permanence is really some of the more easier elements that impact your design. And so again, it's all about choice and observation and whether you want a forest there or not. It's not resource free because, for example, if you want to clear cut a forest, that's going to take a lot of effort. But in that scenario, and rather than clear cut a forest, I would figure out how to work with that forest. So what are some forest crops you can work with in there?
Well, of course, a lot of it depends on the forest you got, right? I mean, we've all seen scabby, nasty fourth growth forests full of Virginia pine and, just twisted remnant left behind chestnut oaks and stuff. And sometimes the right answer is just kill them all. Let God sort them out, right?
Yeah, or at least thin it. I love that phrase, more forest, less trees.
Interesting. And it is true that kind of the math of how much sun falls on how many leaves is actually the math of the local productivity of your forests. Here in our place, we had some poorly thought through white pine plantations that were a little too heavy, et cetera, and produces very sterile soil underneath and all that. But they got to the point where they were marketable timber. So we clear cut about 5 acres. And then we put in but we left very few hardwood trees that were there as pioneers to provide seeds. And we also planted about 100 things. And over time, it came in. It is so bushy and so productive. It's amazing, right? The chinkapin oaks that we put in there, it's crazy. It's deer paradise at this point when it was just this sterile corridors under the white pines.
Yeah, what a joy it is to see a project like that start to happen too.
Exactly. I'm going to skip over microclimate and buildings and infrastructure, but here's this next one, real important one: soil fertility and management. If you think about one of the bad things Game A has done is basically not paid suitable attention to our topsoil and to our microbiomes in the soil. When history looks back, they're going to look back on this epoch and say, Jesus, you stupid fucks, why did you do that? But permaculture is not about that. So talk about how you guys think about soil fertility and the management of the soil.
There's a metaphor we use of the three-legged stool: chemical, physical, and then biological. What's really interesting, and I'm not a scientist, I think about this like a poet. And what's really interesting for me is we've focused for the last 50 years, gardeners have or more, on the chemical and the physical aspects of the soil. But what's not as well known and is more exciting is the biological aspects of the soil, and how increasing soil life, which is so easy to do, increasing soil life can actually increase the plant's ability to take up nutrients. And sometimes, not always, it's as simple as adding organic matter.
And of course, smaller scale, composting is a way to get some great microbiomes going, and some macro stuff too, bugs and worms of all sorts, not just earthworms, etc. And Celia gets great mileage out of her compost heap.
Exactly. And so one of the reasons why some folks get really curious why it's so low on that ordered list. And it's because often it's takes less resources and less effort to change that soil pretty quickly with compost, with organic matter. We often get asked by people, let's go find the best soil on my 10 acres where I'm going to put the garden. And then the garden might be 10 acres away from the house. No. Don't do that. Instead, use that resource and the effort to change the soil right next to the house so you're not walking, a half hour or more every day just to get to your tomatoes, because then you're not going to grow any tomatoes.
It is manageable, unlike landform. Unless you got a D9, you're not going to change the shape of the land too much. But you can change the nature of the soil over time, but not overnight, unless you're going to be Chemical Joe or Chemical Ali, the chemistry farmer, which I presume you guys reject.
Yes. But for example, the organic matter in my soil, over 5 years of farming, it went from 2% up to 9%.
That's quite good. All right, final one. Let's keep this short because we've got a lot to cover here. It's so much fun, right? Aesthetics and experience of place.
Yeah, unfortunately, to much to the frustration of my wife, and I think Trevor took a different tact, him and Jenna. I ignored this aesthetics. And now
what a dude, what a guy, right?
I know, right? I didn't even find out, Jim, that my wife liked yellow flowers until 2 years ago. We've been married for 25 years.
Yeah, I read that story and I go, oh, okay. Now, what's Celia's favorite color of flower? I don't know.
Oh, yeah, right? You miss that sometimes.
I know she likes flowers.
Yeah. But it is an easier one to manipulate or to intervene in. And it also depends on the context you're farming in. But yeah, the sense of place has become very important for me. And I know for Trevor and Jenna, from the start, that's something they've thought about as they built their farm up.
Yeah, it is a beautiful place over there. So all you dudes, particularly the early dudes, listen to the wife and pay some attention to the aesthetics and ask her what color flowers she likes, please.
Otherwise, you might get a phrase. My wife said some version a couple of years of, if this doesn't change, I'm leaving. You can come with me, but I'm leaving.
Okay. Yeah, we all know how, especially part-time farms can get a little on the junky side, right?
Yes.
All right, let's move on here toward the end of we're going to skip over some other cool stuff, but the human sectors part. And this is, of course, the bane of many people trying to make it in permaculture or other kinds of local, honorable, soil-honoring farming is money, all right? And more broadly, as you guys put it, 8 different kinds of capital. But let's start with the first one on your list, which is the money game. We know a lot of local producers. In fact, Celia's off right now getting stuff, though I laugh and call it the 100-mile lettuce, right? It comes from a Poplar Ridge farm, right? Very great, diversified family farm, but man, that shit moves a ways around here. But I sometimes calculate what these people are making per hour, and it's like, all right, plus or minus the federal minimum wage. And these are hard-working, smart people. Talk to me about the financial aspects of trying to play this game.
I think you just said it. It's hard as hell. It's hard as hell. Margins are thin and hustle and hours are high. And sometimes you don't know how much money's going to come in. You could do $3,000 on one Saturday to market, and then the next Saturday it rains and you do $500. And you need that extra $2,500 for your cash flow. And it's really tricky. Not to mention, some of us, myself, one of them, student loans. You got mortgages. And so for first generation farmers, the financial game of homesteading or market farming or a U-pick orchard like Trevor and Jenna are doing are really challenging when you got to factor in all the other, honestly, game A shit that we've all accumulated over the years.
And, to be utterly frank, both you and Trevor and both of your spouses have day jobs, right?
Yeah, we do now. Ever since 2018, I have a day job now, and my wife has a day job, And so did Trevor and Jenna. And it's the only way we figured out how to make this hustle work, because we're first generation farmers, because we have a mortgage, because we have student loans that we've got to pay off, and kids.
Yes, indeed. And how to square this circle is actually a very interesting question. And I say the first generation part's a significant part, because the ones I've seen most successful at trying to do diversified family farming, direct to consumer, tend to have been people who inherited family farms.
Yes. Yeah. And I don't, I don't want to be bitter when I talk about it. It's something I'm happy for them to have that advantage. And often it takes that advantage. Or just there are folks like Radical Roots in Harrisonburg that have done it, and I'm amazed. They're our heroes, and so the folks that pull it off are really incredible. They also work probably 120 hours a week.
That's my experience with successful farmers. This is not a lazy man's job by any means, right?
Nope.
And that's why most of the bucolic hippies back to the land failed miserably, right? Sitting around smoking dope all day ain't a way to make it as a farmer.
There is no time for a bong hit when you're trying to grow vegetables. There's been many a night that my wife has been come home on a Friday night after a long day's work, put a headlamp on and help me bag lettuce.
Yep, indeed. Again, in the interest of time, I'm not going to have you go over all 8 forms of capital that you talk to. I'm just going to read off the list. If you have anything you want to say about one of them or 2 of them, just do so when I'm done. Started with financial, then social capital, and that's this thing we talked about earlier. Better to have neighbors than ammo when the shit hits the fan. Living, intellectual, experiential. It's like you have to know shit, right? And that's a hard hill to climb. It takes longer than people think to become an expert at anything, right? Cultural, that's an important one. What is the culture that not only are you embedded in, but what culture are you making, right?
Yeah, recipes and music and what you're passing on.
Spiritual, which I sometimes call the other S word. We'll just skip over that one.
For the Ruttian folks, we can call that purpose. How about that?
Yeah, and I did see that you called it purpose. I go, absolutely, purpose is great. Just why do you need ghosts associated with your purpose, right? I don't need no stinking spirits lurking about, right? That's what I have Lysol for. I just spray it in the air, get rid of all those ghosts, right? I guess I'm going on the topic of spiritual. I created a meme recently. I circulate a little bit. It's just too good not to share. For Easter, which was a Zap Comics style. Remember Zap Comics, the crazed hippie kind of art? Showed a crazed Zap Comics dude with his legs bent, holding a cigarette above his head, and it was labeled, "How does an atheist light a cigarette?" And then the tagline at the bottom was, that was a speech balloon, had the guy saying, "God sucks."
Yes, Jim. That's
anyway, so let's move on here. This is really more Trevor's baby than yours, but you want to talk to the idea of food forests a little bit.
Yes, definitely. Food forests are, again, permaculture is using nature as a model to design sustainable human habitats, right? So the idea of food forests can also be considered or called forest gardening, is essentially gardening like the forest. And so you can think about a forest as having several different layers, from canopy layers to shrub layers to herbaceous layers to vine layers. And each of those layers occupy different niches in the ecosystem. And then through clever design, you can create these very abundant landscapes in a small area, by simply observing how a forest works and then trying to mimic that in your own system.
Of course, most current existing forests in the east, the region we both live in, aren't exactly very productive for human purposes other than wood. They're pretty good at producing hardwood or softwood, depending on the nature of forest. Like, red oak acorns aren't much use unless you really are dedicated to doing a whole lot of processing on them. White oak acorns you can make use of. Not that many people do. But these aren't really highly productive for humans. So how do you think about that? I mean, is this something you have to build from scratch, basically?
Kind of, and it goes pretty quickly. So you observe succession essentially, and you think through what that forest might look like in 100 years, and then you do your plant selection and your planting in a way that can help speed up that succession. And sometimes it's not a one-to-one model. And so you might not put a canopy layer in. You might just keep that mid-story layer and go with all fruit trees. You might not put a vining layer in. You might just go with a shrub layer. But essentially, you're thinking through functions that you want. So some of it's food, some of it's medicine, some of it is heat, right? So you do want some wood. Some of it might be for furniture. And so you're making those plantings rather than have nature plant through a bird shitting or a bear shitting. You're choosing what you want and placing it there in a way that, based on observing nature, you know it's going to thrive.
Now let's move on to the next very important point. I don't know if I ever heard the term before, but it really resonated once I read it and compared it to traditional industrial agriculture. Or I should say traditional industrial. It's kind of an oxymoron because traditional agriculture wasn't like this, but the industrial agriculture we have today. And that's the concept of permaculture plant guilds. The idea that these are purposeful purposes. When you had some term where things served multiple functions, etc. Why don't you give us a riff on what you guys mean when you talk about plant guilds? So
again, like permaculture, there's a lot of different definitions that other people have. The ones we go with is a plant guild is a series of plantings or a planting space with plants that serve 5 different functions. So we call one function an anchor plant. So that might be your fruit tree or your nut tree. Another one might be your beneficial attractor. So that's going to attract beneficial insects into the system. Another one might be your nitrogen fixer, which will fix the nitrogen in your system. Another one might be your barrier plant. And so that's a plant that you plant in your drip line to keep the encroaching grass into your system or other plants you don't want. And then the final one would be what's called a dynamic accumulator, which would be a plant with a deep taproot that's going to pull all those minerals up to the surface and then drop them. And again, it's about through observation, identifying plants that occupy different niches in the ecosystem, and then planting them together so that the whole is greater than the parts.
Yeah, of course, nature does that through evolutionary processes. If something isn't working with everything else, it goes extinct typically, right? Unless it's an invasive, then it just fucks up everything. But if it's been co-evolved with the rest of the system, they kind of are designed to work together. But most of our depleted landscapes aren't like that today.
Yeah, and again, and so it takes at this point it takes a little bit of intervention. If we just tried to live off the forest, like you mentioned, how a lot of your forests aren't very productive anymore, that wouldn't really work. So it takes a little bit of intelligent and intentional decision making with a goal in mind to create your own food forest.
Got it. And that's very interesting. All right, let's hop ahead a little bit here and talk about anchor plants. And I'm going to specifically hop to a Ryan story about the persimmon, the American persimmon. So tell the story first, and then tell us about the persimmon as at least an afterthought.
I knew you'd like that story, Jim.
Well, after our intro, I had to do it, right?
So the persimmon story is a hunting story, very much so. And I'm a convert to hunting. I grew up playing basketball in Waynesboro. Camouflage was something that usually meant trouble. And I grew up making fun of people who hunted. And later in life, I think they're on the age 37, 38, I had a friend who said, stop making fun of hunting, come hunting with me. And that was all it took, and now I'm obsessed. Not only did I want to become a hunter, but I also wanted and became a bow hunter. Hours and hours of shooting arrows. Always wanted, and I know this is more of a West Coast style of hunting, wanted to do the spot and stalk on a deer and never had an opportunity to, because over here on the East Coast, it's really tough. The whitetails are really skittish. You're often hunting close quarters, and we just more of an ambush style hunting culture here. But one morning, I'm heading to the stand with my bow, and I was late. I don't know, what I'd done the night before, but I'd gotten up late, ate too much oatmeal, whatever it was, and got as daybreak's happening on this ridge heading towards my stand, and I see a little piece of yellow move, not like grass, and it shouldn't have been that color. And immediately I was like, oh shit, that was a horn. Uh-oh, what do I do now? Right? I didn't want to spook it. I was trying to make a decision. Do I keep going to the stand? And my heart was beating real fast. Anyone who's hunting, Jim, you know that feeling.
When you're a rookie in particular.
Oh man, going nuts, freaking
Buck
out.
fever, as we call it.
Yes, and I was like, the wind was just right, and the deer was laying. He was laying on this on below the ridge, and he was facing down the ridge. But for some reason, he had messed up the wind. And so the wind was blowing in my face, and he had no idea I was there. And I was like, all right, I'm going to try this. This thing I've been reading about and hearing about. I think I took my shoes off. The grass was wet, and my socks got all wet. But I started off in a crawl. And it was one of those moments that it was just taking too damn long. Like it probably was only 20 minutes. I don't know how long it was.
Probably 5 minutes. Or
every second was embedded in that second felt like an hour. And I'm just crawling along, and the whole time saying to myself, please don't see me, or please don't smell me. Please don't smell me. And I get to what felt like close enough, 20 yards or so, maybe it was 10 yards. And I start to stand up really slowly. And the whole time I'm just begging, please don't. And I get up and I start to draw my bow. And at this point, no clue, right? Know something's going on. Kind of, how a deer will turn their head, but not all the way around. And at this point, I forget what I wrote about. I forget whether I grunted or he caught wind of me, but something happened, and that was it. And he stood up, right as I had drawn, and boom, I let go real fast. And when I let go, I was so nervous. The first thing I did is I just sat down, right, real quick, right in the grass. And he took off running. I heard the thump. The legs kicked, which sometimes means a heart shot. And I was like, all right, what's going to happen now? And I again, it's probably 20 minutes, but it felt like 5 hours. I watched him run off and just stand, and I'm sitting in the grass. And this was during 2018, in fact. And all this tragedy was overcoming my family, and we're going through all this tough times, but I was dialed in on what this buck was going to do. And I remember just weeping there in the field as I start to see the blood spilling from the animal, and he falls. And that shudder of relief and joy and sadness was just this amazing kind of, if you haven't hunted or killed a deer, much less stalked one, it's something that's hard to relate to, but it's something I'll never forget. And everything from going to the animal and gutting them and having the persimmon, that great fruit, spill out everywhere, right? Every movement after that, up until the moment we had dinner, was almost like so mindful of an experience that it was its own separate moment. I've never captured that kind of ineffable experience of time quite like that ever since. And I remember sitting at dinner, feeling proud of the food the family was going to eat, and just meditating on how without that persimmon in that forest, I would not have had this experience with this deer.
Now, tell me about the persimmons a little bit, because that then is the meat of the rest of that chapter, or not, at least that section.
I mean, it's a native fruit. There are cultivars that do really well. My favorite is Nikita's Gift, but it's one of these fruits that requires a hard frost to taste just right.
Yeah, I remember as a kid, we had some growing wild in our woods, and we thought we'd bite into them before the frost. We didn't know. And talk about, just drying your mouth out and alkaline as hell.
Real cloying, yeah.
Terrible. But then after, they're very different.
Yeah. I found that you almost have to have them rotting. And if you catch them with the rotting, turning a little bit black on the forest floor, that's when they're at their sweetest. And so they're really hard to get. But man, it's one of those. I think it's considered the fruit of the gods. It's one of those fruits that once you taste a truly ripe persimmon, you never want another fruit again. And it's you can make jellies and jams and breads out of it. It's such a great fruit and such a great tree, and quite easy to grow here.
Doesn't grow so well in Highland County, but probably would grow fine over in Augusta.
Oh, really? Oh, you guys are like almost zone 4 up there, though.
Yeah, we can be considered zone 4. It can get as cold. The times we've had this place, it's been to 30 below twice.
Whoa.
And it was 14 below just last winter. Or was it the winter before last? So it can get pretty damn cold here. And so things that aren't deeply cold tolerant just don't make it here. We did plant some, but they just didn't make it.
Okay, and that's not wind chill either.
No, we're not talking wind chill here. Not that bullshit stuff they give you on the TV. We're talking about thermometer temperature.
That's cold as shit. That's like Minnesota, Jim.
Well, actually, my mother's from northern Minnesota. It's a bunch of cousins up there, and it gets a lot colder than that up there. Okay. 54 degrees below was the coldest my mother ever remembered growing up, and you'll love this tale. I grew up in the D.C. suburbs, and there, if it snowed 2 inches, they'd close school. My mother gets so pissed off. She'd say, in 12 years I went to school, they only closed school once, and that was the day it was 54 degrees below zero because the oil in the trucks, in the buses, froze. And that's the only good reason to cancel school. Goddamn kids around here. Rah, rah, rah.
I love that story. And what's interesting, the pattern of that story, as I'm aging myself and almost 50, like that shit is true. Each generation gets softer and softer. And I know your buddy Turchin, right? Did I say his name right?
Yeah, Peter Turchin, yep.
Yeah. Apparently we're going to have a reset or something. But that is observable. Like it is a softer generation.
Yeah, I would say even my generation, the boomers, were definitely softer than the World War II generation. Those guys were tough. I mean, they may not have been too smart, but they sure were tough, right?
I don't know. I claim Gen X's to be tougher than boomers.
No, hell no. We'll have to have a rumble. We'll line up all the boomers and all the Xers. We'll go at it. I think guile and experience will trump youth and athleticism.
That would be, talk about like Young Caporta talking about YouTube fight videos. That would be a hilarious YouTube fight video.
That would be hilarious. Right? Well, unfortunately, us boomers, I mean, I was still perfectly happy to take care of myself up till the time I got about 70. And then you get a little creaky. I can still probably whip your average. I know I can whip your average millennial. Anybody can whip a millennial, right? But an extra, that might be a little more troublesome.
All you got to do is talk real loud and they'll fall over, the millennials.
Well, millennials are great folks. And in fact, a lot of them see further than we do, because they've been born into the shitstorm and have had the shitstorm their whole life. And so I really respect the ethical core of millennials and their way of trying to make their lives work. But unfortunately, us, their parents, spoilt them rotten to a significant degree, and they just aren't as tough.
I like that frame. So the funny part is we're missing Trevor here, because Trevor, I make fun of millennials and Trevor constantly. He gets mad at me all the time for being a Gen Xer.
I know, that's true. Yeah, he is a classic millennial right in the middle there. Interesting. So and the persimmon tree is an interesting one. The other one we'll just talk about very briefly, because one of my favorite trees is the willow. I remember as a little kid being quite amazed you could break the branch off a willow tree, stick it in the ground, and at least 50% of the time it'd root and it would grow. And we had a big old black willow in our backyard in crappy suburbia. But that sucker was the scion for many a tree, not only in our yard, but around the neighborhood.
It's incredible. And there's so many varieties and beautiful varieties of willow. And it's something that a lot of us, Trevor, Emily, myself, have just started experimenting with. And so we're now all harvesting cuttings for each other. And again, like that scion that gave to so many other properties, we're sharing and starting to do things like weave willow domes and willow archways. And it's something that I always thought was a little bit greedy on the soil and the water for your forest. And it turns out that that's not true.
And as you say, there's many varieties. We have a variety in the back of our farm where we call Poacher Hollow, where a cold spring-fed stream comes out and runs through a course, and relatively short. They don't get any more than about 6 feet tall, and they're quite thin and whippish, right? Apparently, they're the ones the Indians used to weave baskets with. And the things, there were just a few of them in there. We protected them a little bit. And then now they've gone nuts and just completely done both sides of that water course, which, as you know, really improves the water course because it keeps the water shaded and cool and all that and retains water and all that. And these are very different than the black willows, which can be 30 feet tall and big and round. These are completely different. And there's the weeping willows, which I think is an Asian willow of some sort. They don't live very long, though. They're kind of a classic ornamental. They're not really what I'd call of tremendous use. But anyway, I've always had a great love for the willow tree. I always thought they were kind of cool. Let's go on to another one of my favorites, and probably the best story in the book, the redbud.
Oh, you like that story?
Oh, that was nuts. Because I love intense stories, right? Things that you will never forget your whole life. So we don't, again, times, I wish we had 5 hours. This would be so much fun. We can go full 2 hours if you got the time. Tell the tale of your dad and Don and you, and then how you ended up under a redbud, and then talk about the redbuds.
Well, I will. Rather than bury the lead, I'll lead with the ending. I was 8 years old, and it was my first shot of bourbon. I
like that finale.
Yeah.
And your dad was there, and he didn't care.
My dad gave it to me. Yep. It was. So my dad had a best friend, Don Johnson was his name, and they liked to fish together, obsessed with it. A lot of bass fishing back in the day. And this was at Lake Anna. It was a March, and it was one of those beautiful Marches where the redbuds are starting to come in to bloom. And it was a beautiful day. And I thought I was 8 years old. I'd gotten to skip a day of school to go out on the John boat with Don and Dad. And of course, when Don and Dad go on the John boat, they drank. And I had yoo-hoos. And I'm so grateful that they took me along on those trips. And it was a great trip. We were catching fish, having a great time. I'm hearing the boys talk, kind of like how when you and your brothers get together. And it's definitely this camaraderie happening that was so great to be part of. And then the storm came, and that was scary as shit. And they, of course, ignored the beginnings of the storm because it was a part of the day where I had caught some fish. And whenever an 8-year-old outfishes you can't let that happen. And the fish start biting, and they're gonna stay and catching some fish. And then lightning cracks, and I mean, it wasn't obvious how dangerous it was to me until my dad yelled at me, because my dad's a calm man. He does not raise his voice. Very nurturing, and his buddy Don was just crazy as can be. And when Dad got nervous and said, "We got to head back," I knew it was bad. And so lightning's cracking and trees are catching on fire. Hail is falling everywhere. And we get through a part of the lake where the storm calms down a little bit, and it seems like everything's going to be okay. And Dad's still feeling nervous, so he tells Don to hug the bank. And what'd we do? He grounded the motor in the John boat. And trying to fix it, he cut a tip of his finger off. And so then the motor's in the boat, and the boat's filling up with water.
Blood everywhere, no doubt.
Blood's everywhere, mud everywhere. I'm 8 years old, and I'm not holding it together. I'm losing my shit. I'm crying. And the storm starts up again. And then I'm furiously getting the water out of the boat, and they start paddling back. We get to the ramp. Get out, get the boat out, and they duck into a convenience store right next to the lake and kind of leave me alone by the boat. And I'm just recovering, hanging out there, and I remember fishing out this dirty bottle of bourbon because I'm like, oh, what can we salvage from this? I don't know what my 8-year-old brain was thinking, but Don and Dad came out of the convenience store, and their dad was smoking a cigarette and looked over, and I remember just being proud as can be, holding up like this prize. We caught all these fish, but the fish are gone now. We survived, but I've got the bottle of bourbon. It's bloody, it's dirty now. It looks like it's really old. And at that moment, like things do in our lives, the features of the landscape kind of start to brighten, and the red, the pink, the colors of the redbud are over right next to the lake. We go have a seat, and Dad says, "Here you go, boy. It'll warm you up."
That's a good one. Yeah, and I love the redbud. I mean, the redbud, when they're and we've just about finished the redbud season here in the Shenandoah Valley. But when you're in the redbud season, it's if you're not used to seeing redbuds, they're just amazing. Some places they're just thick along the sides of the roads. Probably the best spot around here is going up Route 340 from Luray to Front Royal is one of the more amazing ones. Back in the days, I used to live in Lexington, Kentucky, and traveled the roads as a traveling textbook salesman. I always look forward to timing my drive from Lexington to Knoxville at the peak redbud season.
Yeah.
They're just so beautiful.
And when you're paying attention, the variation in color, I mean, it's from reds to a deep, dark purple and pinks. And the heart-shaped leaves are beautiful. And you can eat the flowers, of course, and they fix nitrogen in the soil.
Yeah, that's the key part in your guild ensemble is it's one of the nitrogen fixers. Yeah, we've tried to get them to grow here in Highland County. We got a couple of them that have made it, but again, it's marginal. We noticed it's funny. We were driving back from Pittsburgh a couple of weeks ago. It was prime redbud season, but we noticed that the redbuds didn't prosper above 2,000 feet. You know, when we were above 2,000 feet up on the Allegheny front up there in West Virginia and Maryland, no redbuds. But when you got, and before and after, there were redbuds. And then we got above 2,000 feet, got into Highland County, and got, no redbuds, or very few, just ones people had planted in their yards. But they are a great plant because they, not only are they beautiful, not particularly useful for anything, they're very spindly and grow every which way, but they do fix some nitrogen.
Yeah. That makes you want to learn more about that 2,000 feet phenomenon.
I don't know if it's just an observation. I have no idea if it's, a thing or just happened to be the combination of temperature and elevation. But I think 2,000, I'm going to guess something around 2,000 feet at this latitude is probably about the limit for them to naturally reproduce.
Well, Trevor and I will dig into that now.
Yeah, let me know. Oh, the other one, black locust.
Oh, yeah.
When I was courting my wife, her stepdad, you worked me like a mule, right? Because they had a little farmette, 18 acres kind of deal. Most of it leased out to hippies to grow loofah gourds and shit like that. But they also had a wood lot, and he heated it with wood and all this. And the main wood lot was some pretty decrepit, and many of them dead, black locusts, right? And, I was not at that point an experienced timberman, and I barely knew what I was doing. He knew less what he was doing. He had crappy, lowest grade home light chainsaws, right? And he didn't even know you were supposed to sharpen the blades. Oh. And for the audiences, the hardest wood is probably the hardest major wood in these parts is black locust. It's like cutting iron. And you'd see sparks come off the wood sometimes. It's that hard. And I cut, I don't think hundreds, but certainly dozens of black locust trees and split them with a maul, right? And God almighty, talk about backbreaking labor. But the payoff is it's about the best firewood you're ever going to find.
Yeah, that sounds miserable, that work. There's nothing worse than cutting black locust with a dull saw blade.
A cheap-ass 16-inch blade, home light from Monkey Ward's, right, to be precise. Yeah.
But what I discovered from my buddy, we'll call him the Soul Valley Wizard because he's allergic to fame, they're really great to heat with. We have a little small cabin and a little yodel stove that heats it. And I can cut 13-inch logs that are 3 years old, and their thickness does not require seasoning or splitting. I can throw them right into the yodel. They'll burn hot. And then, of course, through this method called coppicing, they grow right back. And so every 3 years, I can harvest the same tree for firewood. It's fantastic.
Yeah, they are the wood is amazing. And the hot burning, and they produce an extremely dense coal also that holds its heat for quite a period of time. So that's the second one we're going to talk about that we talked about here in your guild of the nitrogen fixers. Another one, now we're going on to the next category, which is your barrier plants, basically stuff to keep other things out. But the first example you give is actually also useful, and that's another one I like a lot is the rhubarb.
Oh, yeah. Oh, it's a great plant.
Yes, tell me a little bit about your relationship with the rhubarb. Your story in this case isn't too dramatic, so you can kind of skip over the story and tell us why you like the rhubarb and what are the kind of things that it can be used for.
Yeah, my allegiance to rhubarb has more to do with some of that cultural Lutheran upbringing than anything else. But it's something that about a decade ago I came to really appreciate as a multifunctional plant that is really, really useful to cook with and you get creative. I always thought it was just strawberry rhubarb pie. But we threw a big party one year and made rhubarb margaritas and rhubarb barbecue sauce. And my daughter loves to eat the stalk raw, dipped in honey. It's just a really amazing plant that a lot of folks overlook. But
it's the easiest damn thing in the world to grow. In fact, mostly, how do you keep it from taking over?
You cannot kill it. One plant, I planted one plant and then divided over the years. And a decade later, I had like 50 rhubarbs on my property. And it makes a great cold soup. And it's bomb-proof.
Yeah, very cool. And, it does require a fair bit of sun, though, doesn't it? I think it does.
It does to a point. So if you're less concerned with high yield and use it as a barrier plant in the food forest, it'll still produce quite well. And in fact, this is interesting. It will actually produce deeper into the summer in the shade than if in full sun. So full sun, you'll get that early spring, big, robust burst, but then it declines very quickly in the summertime. If you got them in the shade, that decline will hold off deeper into August and September.
That's cool. I had no idea. I've always seen it grown in the sun, and when we grew it here, we grew it in the sun. Another one that I was kind of surprised that you listed as a barrier plant, but I guess it makes sense, are spring bulbs. So how do spring bulbs, your tulips and your daffodils and your daylilies, how do those work as barriers? You
really need to plant them thick, but around, if you've got a mulched area and you worry about grass encroaching, by putting almost like a moat of spring bulbs around, it creates a barrier where the grass will not jump over it. It won't throw if you've got crabgrass or wiregrass, it won't throw rhizomes through it. And so it protects that encroaching invasive grasses around a mulched area really well.
And we have our whole yard surrounded by, on one side, Facilia's flower beds, many of which are bulbs, but then on the other side, the long run, it's all tiger lilies, very dense now. And we rescued them from a dump. So I feel very good about having rescued some tiger lily rhizomes, or whatever the hell they are, from a dump. And we put them out fairly evenly spaced. Now they've grown into a solid wall of tiger lilies.
Yeah, there is a type of permaculture person that does not like flowers. And thinks along the lines of functions. A lot of writing about some of the flowers like we did was intentional to give folks permission to put some beautiful things in their design. It's going to attract insects, but it's also can be functional as barrier plants. I love that tiger lily wall you got.
Yeah, I'll show it to you next time you come out here. It's pretty nice. Now, and again, tiger lilies can get nipped by a late hard frost here, and this year they got nipped. I will see. Now it looks like they survive. I see some buds out there. Look out my office window, and I'm looking into a 30-foot run dense with tiger lilies.
Yes,
and they'd be nice. Another one that you classified as a barrier plant is one of your more hair-raising stories, which is the garlic.
the garlic. We're out in Hawaii, and my wife's 8 months pregnant. No, she's 6 months pregnant. And this was our last little gasp. We spent 5 years out there. And my wife's a very tough Augusta County woman, athletic as all hell, and a great surfer. But she's got a big belly on her and was not quite comfortable on the board. And she's paddling out after catching a wave. The board picks the wave picks the board up and smacks her in the nose. It breaks her nose, and she's bleeding everywhere. And I got really scared. I paddled in, I found her, and we end up going to the hospital where while we walk in, she's 6 months pregnant, bleeding with 2 black eyes, gash across her nose. And we both had to get scolded by the doctor in that one. And man, she's a tough woman.
So how's that tie into the garlic?
For us, our experience of Hawaii was very much the smell of garlic. Everywhere you go, the beaches, everyone's cooking out, and it's always garlicky shrimp or a chicken with a garlic sauce on it. And we lived up the street from a restaurant called Ninikuya. And that restaurant, everything from the water was infused with garlic. And so it was just this scent that just permeated our experience with Hawaii and that specific story. As our days waned, it became more and more obvious that we were probably never going to go back as residents. And one of the things that we did in our homestead, the first thing we did was planted garlic. And it's one of the easiest vegetables to grow. And we have a Appalachian a garlic that we love growing called Music, with very large bulbs. Much to my daughter's chagrin, I used to eat it raw in the mornings, and she would hate to ride in the car to school with me. But it's just a plant that I love.
Of course, here where we are, we have a lot of the wild garlic called ramps. And
man,
the ramps are, our early beds are starting to tail, but the ones we have deep in Morgue Hollow, those suckers will still be around for another week or two. And I think we're going to go out tomorrow, if it doesn't rain, and dig some ramps. Do you guys ever use ramps in your permaculture?
I try to. I'm so jealous, Jim. I cannot keep them. I always get folks to bring me roots. I cannot get them to take in Churchville, where I live. I actually found ramps once in July in Highland County. It was amazing.
July? That's pretty. It must have been at high elevation in a dark hollow.
It was. In fact, it was so cold that July the house had a wood stove going.
Interesting. Yeah, those things don't like too much heat, and they have a relatively short season. But we got a ridiculous amount. We have. I don't know if it's probably not a full quarter acre, but maybe an eighth of an acre of ramps, pretty dense. It's like, whoa.
You could make a fortune selling those to hippies.
Yeah, that's true. You see them $30 a pound, things like that. That's interesting. But yeah, those are really good. And the thing that made me think about that was the daughter complaining about the garlic, right? Because these things give you a breath for a while. But as Celia and I will say, we're frying up some ramps to put on our steak. We'll say, good thing we're married, right?
Nice. There you go.
Ramps probably not a thing for people in the dating scene, right?
No.
All right, let's go on to our next category, beneficial attractors. The first one on your list is one I only know from tea. I sometimes will drink tulsi tea. Did not realize it was such an interesting plant.
Yeah, a lot of the really bold smelling plants operate as beneficial attractors, or sometimes insect confusers or pest confusers. But the idea with that in your guild is you just want to create a part of that ecosystem that helps balance out and kind of keep some of your pests in check. And tulsi is a great plant for that. And of course, we love it because of its as a tea. It's got a great taste, but it's also adaptogenic. And for me, that's another really scary, powerful story in the book. That smell of tulsi, that's the summer we tried to grow it for market, was the summer that my wife almost died from a, what do you call it?
Ectopic pregnancy.
Yeah, bleeding internally. She almost lost half her body's blood and was fine the next day. But that day was a tough moment. And one of the ways we nursed her back to health was through tulsi tea, because it helps your body adapt to stress and strain. And it's something that we had grown in abundance because of my farm manager, Nick Faircloth. And so I always joke with him, it's still never sold.
Is that tall Nick? Is he a real tall guy?
Yep.
Tall and skinny guy. I remember him from up at Allegheny Mountain Institute.
Oh, yeah, he's great. He's great.
Is he still around these parts, or did he go back west?
Oh, he's still around. He's teaching shop and gardening at Kate Collins Middle School in Waynesboro.
Cool. I liked him. He's a good guy. All right, another one on your beneficial attractors list. Of course, we have to talk about your favorite and mine, cannabis.
Oh, man.
I can tell you, Ryan knows how to grow cannabis.
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. And I love growing it.
You got to tell the 2010 story. It's too choice not to.
Yeah, this is a long time ago. Cannabis at the time was illegal, and it is now legal. And I was committed, even as a young hippie, to adhering to the law. We had partly because I was so recognizable that if I was going to do something illegal, I was going to get caught. And we had just formed a little cooperative, started farming tomatoes and all kinds of mixed vegetables. And to fast forward to the exciting part, I'm out there one day hoeing a row, and I see a helicopter. And that helicopter, it is hovering, and I am naive. I don't know what's going on. I look up, and it's not going anywhere. And I keep working, and it gets to a point, maybe about 20 minutes later, that I can't ignore it. And I'm terrified, and I go inside. When I go inside, the helicopter seemingly flies away, and what it does is it goes to the top of the hill where the road I live on is, and I'm looking out the window, and I see it turn around. As it turned around, it's flying low, and it comes flying down the road back towards my property, and this time behind it was a series of vehicles, most of them unmarked, spinning blue lights, followed by a marked vehicle. And the whole time I'm watching this and I'm going, please don't turn, please don't turn, please don't turn in my driveway. Well, sure enough, they turn in my driveway. And they come up that driveway fast as can be. One of them even caught air. It was like crazy. And I'm just terrified. And I step outside of the house at this point, hoe in hand. And man, they stop fast and short. And it's all choreographed. Open their doors, step outside with weapons. I'm shitting myself. I always joke. I think I joked in the story. Have you ever seen the movie Goonies, Jim?
No.
Oh, you got to see that movie. Well, in the movie, there's a young character, a little kid named Chunk. And one of the evil characters says, start from the beginning. Tell me everything. And Chunk starts telling him all the bad things he did when he was like 3 years old. At this moment, with those guns trained on me, I'm going through all the bad things I've ever done, wondering why in the hell they're here. What did I do wrong? And one of the plainclothes people steps up to me. He's got those Cool Hand Luke sunglasses on, and then following him is a shorter guy in camouflage, and he's ready to fight, man. And he says, "Mr. Blosser, drop your weapon."
Your hoe, right?
And I dropped the hoe, and I go, I'm really scared. And he goes, what do you have to be afraid of? And I was like, all those guns pointed at me. It's like 15 men in camouflage. And I don't know what's going on. And he says, we're here to get your marijuana. And I say, I don't know what you're talking about. And he goes, it's right back there. And he points to the back of my property. And he goes, can we look for it? I go, sure. And then he goes, no, you first. So he marches me with 15 men to the back of my property.
You probably thought you might have had booby traps back there.
I have no idea. I was just terrified. And I'm going, man. And I started thinking maybe some kids snuck it onto the property. So maybe they're right. Oh, shit. And I'm worried, and we get back there and they fan out. And for 15, 20 minutes, they're tearing up tufts of grass. They're looking everywhere and they can't find anything. And then I realized they're wrong. I knew I didn't plant anything. Obviously, some kid didn't bring something onto the property. And at that point, they start yelling and cursing at each other. Chaos ensues. The helicopter one of the guys in the helicopter is screaming, "It's there, it's there!" And the guys from the ground are yelling, "Stop looking through your infrared, dumbass! It's 2:00." I mean, they're screaming. It's nuts. And after the whole ordeal lasted about an hour, and I relaxed. It turned funny when I realized I didn't have any. And that's when the dude in the plain clothes, the suit, and the cool hand Luke sunglasses said, "All right, let's leave." And he turned to me. I think I offered him some okra and tomatoes. He said, "No, thank you, but we gave your neighbors a great story," and they left.
What did your neighbors make out of all this? They could not have missed that show.
No, I had one neighbor come over, was terrified, was like, "Man, I didn't think you'd be here. What would happen?" I told him what happened, and he's like, okay, well, do you need a lawyer?" And I was like, "No, I didn't do anything wrong." And he's like, "You should get a lawyer anyway." I was like, "Okay." And the whole neighborhood just talked about it for a while. And of course, I kept retelling the story. The dark side of that is every time I had a helicopter overhead, still, I get this eerie feeling. And I'm like, man, if they come, there's nothing I can do. Because it was a really terrifying moment. And the minute cannabis became legal to grow as an act of liberation, I was like, I'm going to grow this plant. And I fell in love with it. It's a beautiful plant. And nowadays, when I hear helicopters, even though there's a little tinge of worry, I can always reassure myself, you know what? I'm following the law. They are not here for me.
Yeah, indeed. And funny, our farm up in Highland County was a hippie commune before we bought it. It was a failed hippie commune where all the hippies had dripped away, and the only one left was, guess what, the trust funder who provided the money, right? And it was very marginal. And they tried sheep, they tried garlic, they couldn't do shit because they weren't willing to do the hard work. They did find one crop, though, that they could make money at, and that was reefer. And they apparently were growing and selling quite a bit of reefer out of the farm here for a while. And in fact, there's a story runs around the local area about the hippies had hired a old man and his grandson to, I think maybe it was paint the metal roof or something. Metal roofs need to be painted every 20 years, something like that. Anyway, they get up on their ladder and to get ready to paint, and they look in the attic, and the whole attic is full of plants hanging drying. And apparently they were so shocked the old dude fell off the ladder.
Oh, that's crazy. Yeah.
But anyway, to tie it back to your story, we bought the place. We were, relatively young, married couple with a 6-month-old baby, pretty vanilla at that time. And, but for 10 years on Memorial Day, it must have been a National Guard exercise day, a big old Apache helicopter would come over our farm and give it, about 20 passes back and forth, and then it would hover there for a while, and we just come out and wave, hey, and then after about 10 years, they finally figured out them dirty stinking hippies done left, right? Because they never found anything. Now, let's get back to the book. These kinds of wild stories are throughout this book, but don't get the thing that's all the book is, because he also, after telling the wild story, also goes into a whole bunch of very practical advice about how to grow cannabis. So maybe give the audience a little taste of your knowledge about how to grow cannabis and what to do and what not to do.
I mean, it's a flower, right? And so I like to treat it a lot like I grow tomatoes. You need really high quality soil, which you need for any vegetable. And then you also need strong genetics. And so a lot of folks where they fail with cannabis is they're getting bad seed or plants that the genetics aren't very strong. And then, I mean, it's not magic from there. You gotta really pamper it like you would your tomatoes. You need to stake it. And you need to trim it and prune it for airflow. Otherwise, you're going to get some disease pressure on that. One of the things I've gotten into myself and a a couple other folks at Shando Permaculture is something called Korean natural farming, which is a technique where you use compost, banana peels, comfrey, and you ferment these mixes that you then pour into your soil as you're watering your soil. Check out Korean natural farming is a great way to feed your soil and your cannabis plants. The hard part often in growing cannabis is not the growing, it's the harvesting. And that's when you've got some problems that can set in, like mold. If you don't dry it properly, you can harvest it at the wrong time. So those are some of the detail moments you want to really look for. But the first several months, as long as you're pruning for airflow and providing structure so your plant doesn't get too big and split, you're going to be pretty good.
You also talked about some of the tricks that we knew about in the 70s, right? You want to have all female plants if possible. And if not, you got to cull the male plants early.
Oh, yeah. I left that real important. It's really fun. You can always tell what a male plant is. Everyone says it's hard to tell the difference between a male and a female plant. It actually isn't if you think of what male genitalia looks like. So you can always
hold that picture in your mind, folks, right?
I know, right? But you can always tell a male plant because it grows little balls, a little set of balls. And the minute you have a hunch that's happening, rip it out. Better safe than sorry.
Yeah, talk about drying the plant. One time we came, actually it was out in Minnesota, we came upon some ditchweed, which is essentially marijuana that grows wild, totally useless as it turns out. But we thought we were in the shit because we filled 2 ice chests full of this stuff. And the way we dried it was we put it in pillowcases and put it in the dryer.
Oh no.
It worked.
Did it really?
The temperature off, just air dried it in the dryer. And well, it turned out the shit must have had no THC, or there's so little. I think we put a quarter pound into a batch of spaghetti. It didn't do a damn thing.
Yeah, well, that's the thing I love about this plant is as we continue to study it, now we're studying it, we're finding THC is not as benign as we thought it was. And so as I age, it's something that I need to be aware of with blood pressure, although I adore it. But things like CBD, and CBG for prostate health are really interesting things that are being studied on in terms of compounds the plant has. It's a plant that I am really interested in seeing just how far the medicinal value will go. I don't think it's going to be a wonder drug like many have claimed it is, but it's definitely one of those that can be in the home pharmacy kit and gently support aging adults.
Don't be looking at me when you say that.
Remember, I'm the one that almost has the AARP magazine. I'm counting myself in the club, Jim. I'm an old man.
And of course, the other thing about cannabis, and this is what the settlers used it for, it makes great rope. It can be used to make cloth. It can be used to make paper. It's an excellent source of very high quality cellulose, essentially.
Yeah, and again, it doesn't require it's relatively gentle on the soil too. It's not like corn, wheat, or soy,
which just sucks the nutrients right out, right? Then you're caught in the damn chemical farming cycle, which is not so good.
Yeah.
All right, let's go on to your last category of plants, and I do want to remind people that while this book's got all these great stories, that there's a whole lot of sections about what cultivars to use where, and just real practical stuff. And it's written in plain, understandable English. Even a computer nerd like me could understand it. So keep that in mind, too, when you think about possibly getting this book. So the last category is the dynamic accumulators. Let's start out by what are they accumulating and how do they do it dynamically?
It's funny. Permaculture is very heavy on metaphor, but often very light on scientific study. And so
that's because it was invented by hippies.
I know, right? And again, I'll claim the mantle of a poet, not a scientist. And so the way I conceptualize, the way that idea of dynamic accumulator works is conceptually, it's got a deep taproot. And so it's going down deep into the soil through many layers of the soil and mining all those minerals at the bottom that are hard for plant roots to get to, many of them. And it pulls them up into the leaves of the plant where the leaves of the plant can then deposit them on the surface. So it creates this cycle of mineral deposits. As it gets pushed down, it pulls it back up. And so that's the concept of the dynamic accumulator, is it's balancing out the micronutrients of the soil rather than the macronutrients.
Interesting. And you mentioned one that we've used here, and my wife has used, is comfrey. She really loves comfrey to put under fruit trees and under ornamentals and things of that sort, because it's not like grass, which seems to compete with the trees. It actually seems to help the trees.
Yeah, it's great, and it's easy. I mean, comfrey, once you plant it, you're not getting rid of it, but it's really easy to harvest and distribute, chop and drop. And I fell in love with it as a medicinal because of I've got that old creaking body of a basketball player. I feel like I must have broken every bone in my body, and the making a poultice out of the comfrey and soaking whatever injury you have can be quite healing. I've never done this, but I've got a vision of one day taking a bath in comfrey.
Wow, that's pretty. That shit grows like crazy, so you could do it if you wanted to, right?
It does. I figured it would probably be more gross than anything else, but I just want my body to feel like it's 20 again.
It'd be worth it if it did that. You could just use Viagra. That works just as well.
Oh, that's great.
Another one you talk about in this category is beets. It's an interesting plant. I'm not much of a fan of eating beets myself, but the rest of my family loves them. But I've found that beets are about the best imaginable food plot item for deer hunting. You put in sugar beets, oh my God, you have to chase the deer away with a shovel.
Nice. I didn't even consider that. Yeah, I've heard turnips and radishes.
Yeah, turnips are amazing. They love turnips. They love the greens of radishes, not so much the plants themselves. They love. I used to run 13 food plots around the farm.
Oh yeah.
Don't do any anymore, but we used to do all kinds of stuff. And the one we found that was just the most insane was beets.
Yeah, I love that beet. That's a good idea, the sugar beets as a food plot. I've fallen in love with it as an adult. And it's so easy to grow, and it's so fast to grow as a crop. And of course, it entered into my life in that story through I learned to hate meal trains, despite how well-intentioned they were during my mom's cancer when I was a kid. And all we got was lasagna. It was the 80s, right? And one of Mom's Hungarian friends brought borscht. And it sat on the stove and never turned colors for, I swear, 3 months. It just stayed pink. And so my relationship with the beet was forged in that memory, in that experience. And as an adult, I love growing it. I love cooking it. I actually love borscht now.
I like borscht too. It's one of the things with beets I actually really like a lot. And Celia makes a great, more Hungarian style borscht than Russian style.
Nice. It
has more meat in it. You know, the Hungarian borscht got a lot of meat. The Russian borscht less so.
Yeah. Well, of course, and I love, now you mentioned the Russian borscht, the beet was Rasputin's favorite vegetable. You could see it in his eyes.
I saw that quote. In fact, I actually posted it online today. I thought that was such a depraved quote of Tom Robbins from, what was the name of the book that was from? Anyway.
Jitterbug Perfume.
Yeah, Jitterbug Perfume, one of my favorites. That was such a bizarre quote, I had to share it.
Yeah, I love it. I also love Rasputin, you know? Yeah.
And who's that woman that's advising Trump that this is Rasputin, the one that said he needed to fire this person and that person, and he did?
Oh, yeah.
I forget what her name is, but people were saying, ooh, this is Trump's Rasputin. Apparently she was a real whack job and was in there, got his ear, right? And then, the last one we're going to hit here, before we wrap it up, we're at a good time here, but it's time for us to wrap it. I couldn't believe you said we should grow burdock, that goddamn shit, right?
I know. I hated it. Of course, in the story you hear about it, my daughter almost choked on it. And it's one of those plants that the burrs are just awful. They come into the house on your clothes,
your dog, everything else.
If you don't get the burrs before it's too late, then it just spreads everywhere. And of course, we bought our property. It had done that. But the elegant, I won't call it intelligence because that feels too woo-woo. But it was one of those moments in terms of a medicinal spring tonic that my family was looking for to help us build our health against the occasional pesticide drift and herbicide drift from our neighbor's property. And we had a naturopathic physician on the property one day, and he pointed to the plant and said, "That's your answer. It's as if it wants to be here and knows the spray is happening." And I thought, really? And between that, with that combined with cleavers and a little bit of dandelion, it's a nice spring tonic, a blood cleaner, and a little bit of a gentle liver cleaner. But it also, and digging into this more and growing it more, there's a very popular variety of burdock that's sold at market for the dinner table in Asian cultures called gobo. It is a plant that now I flag it every spring so that when the leaves fall, I'll go dig the root and make a medicine out of it. And slowly, I'm actually getting it's less of it by using it. Less and less of it's on our property, which is great.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Great having you on,
Jim. I appreciate it. This is a lot of fun. I always love talking to you.
Me too. I always love talking to you too. We always have a good time. Audio production and editing by Andrew Blevins Productions. Music by Tom Muller at modernspacemusic.com.